What if the person you can't stop thinking about is no longer controlling your emotions? And what if, at this very moment, they're the ones silently losing control over you? Because the moment the balance shifts, everything they do begins to change. Today, you'll discover the psychological signs that reveal when the unconscious bond reverses. By the end, you'll understand why their next move isn't random, it's almost inevitable. Have you ever noticed someone becoming strangely distant, only to suddenly reappear exactly when you've begun moving on? Most people dismiss this as coincidence. It isn't. The human mind hates losing psychological certainty. When someone no longer reacts the way we expect, our unconscious begins searching desperately for a way to restore what was lost. Stay until the end, because the final insight explains why silence often speaks louder than any confession. The hidden bond between two people rarely begins with words, shared experiences, or even physical presence. It often starts in a place far deeper than conscious thought, where the human mind quietly gathers impressions, emotions, forgotten memories, and unspoken desires. Before two individuals fully recognize the significance of their connection, the unconscious has already begun weaving invisible threads between them. These threads are not mystical forces controlling destiny, but psychological patterns that influence perception, attraction, and emotional response in ways that often escape awareness. This is why someone can enter your life and immediately feel strangely familiar, as though a part of your story had existed long before the meeting itself. The unconscious mind does not communicate through clear logic. Instead, it speaks through symbols, emotions, recurring thoughts, dreams, and subtle instincts. It constantly compares new people with deeply rooted emotional experiences stored over a lifetime. Sometimes, another person unknowingly reflects qualities that remind us of comfort, safety, admiration, or even unresolved emotional wounds. Because these associations operate beneath conscious awareness, the attraction can feel immediate and difficult to explain. Many describe it as an instant connection, believing it appeared out of nowhere, when in reality it has been shaped by countless hidden psychological processes. This invisible bond grows stronger through attention rather than proximity alone. Every meaningful interaction, every moment of emotional vulnerability, and every shared silence adds another layer to the unconscious image each person carries of the other. Over time, that internal image becomes more influential than the actual person. The mind begins responding not only to what the other individual does, but also to what they represent emotionally. A simple message, an unexpected absence, or a familiar expression can trigger powerful feelings because it touches the symbolic relationship living within the psyche. The hidden bond also explains why separation often intensifies emotional awareness instead of weakening it. When physical contact decreases, the unconscious continues its activity, replaying memories, imagining conversations, and searching for meaning in past experiences. What cannot be fully understood by reason is often completed by imagination, making the internal connection seem even stronger than before. This is why people sometimes find themselves thinking about someone at unexpected moments, not because they consciously choose to, but because the unconscious continues processing the emotional significance of the relationship long after the visible interaction has ended. One of the most powerful illusions the mind creates is the belief that we are seeing another person exactly as they are, when in reality, we are often seeing a reflection of ourselves. The unconscious constantly fills in gaps with its own expectations, longings, fears, and unfinished emotional stories. Instead of relating to another individual as a complete human being, the mind quietly paints them with colors borrowed from our inner world. This psychological process can make an ordinary interaction feel extraordinary, convincing us that someone possesses qualities we desperately seek, even when those qualities have never been fully revealed. What feels like absolute certainty about another person may actually be the mind's attempt to to complete its own emotional picture. Projection begins when hidden desires or unresolved conflicts remain outside conscious awareness. Rather than recognizing these feelings within ourselves, we unconsciously place them onto someone else. A person may appear to embody perfect understanding, unwavering strength, unconditional acceptance, or mysterious depth, not because they consistently demonstrate these traits, but because our inner world needs them to. The more emotionally significant the relationship becomes, the more difficult it is to distinguish between who the person truly is and who our unconscious believes they are. This is why intense attraction often develops long before genuine knowledge. We may know very little about someone's values, habits, or character, yet feel an overwhelming certainty that they are uniquely important. The unconscious is responding not only to the individual before us, but also to the symbolic role they have begun to occupy. They become a screen upon which hidden hopes, childhood experiences, unmet emotional needs, and idealized images are silently projected. Every smile appears more meaningful, every silence seems filled with secret messages, and every coincidence feels like undeniable proof of a special connection. Reality, however, gradually tests these projections. As time passes, the other person's ordinary humanity becomes impossible to ignore. They make mistakes, reveal imperfections, express opinions we never expected, and behave in ways that conflict with the ideal image we created. This moment can feel deeply confusing because it is not only our perception of them that changes, but also the unconscious story we have been telling ourselves. Some respond by denying reality and clinging more tightly to the fantasy, while others become disappointed, believing the other person has changed, when in truth, it is the projection that has begun to fade. Recognizing projection does not diminish the value of a relationship. Instead, it allows genuine connection to emerge. When we become aware of the images our unconscious has placed upon another person, we begin to see them with greater clarity. Their strengths no longer need to be exaggerated, and their flaws no longer threaten the entire bond. What replaces illusion is a more grounded form of understanding, where affection is no longer sustained by imagined perfection, but by an honest encounter between two imperfect individuals. The fear of losing control is rarely about control itself. Beneath the surface, it is often a fear of uncertainty, rejection, or the possibility that someone who once occupied a predictable place in our emotional world is no longer within our influence. The unconscious mind seeks stability because stability creates a sense of psychological safety. When a relationship follows familiar patterns, the mind relaxes, believing it understands what will happen next. But when those patterns suddenly change, hidden anxieties begin to rise, and emotions that were once buried quietly move toward the surface. This process often begins when one person starts changing in ways the other did not expect. Perhaps they become less available, stop seeking constant reassurance, or begin directing more attention toward their own growth. From the outside, these changes may appear small, but to the unconscious, they represent a disruption of an established emotional rhythm. What was once certain has become unpredictable, and unpredictability challenges the mind's need for order. As a result, feelings that had remained hidden, jealousy, insecurity, possessiveness, or fear of abandonment, may emerge with surprising intensity. The remarkable aspect of this fear is that it often operates without conscious awareness. A person may genuinely believe they are simply missing someone or wanting to reconnect, while deeper psychological forces are motivating their behavior. They may begin checking messages more frequently, thinking constantly about the relationship, replaying past conversations, or searching for signs that the emotional connection still exists. These actions are not always deliberate attempts to regain control. They are often the unconscious, trying to restore a sense of certainty that has been lost. This fear also explains why emotional reactions can become stronger when someone begins to pull away. The less predictable the relationship becomes, the more attention the unconscious directs toward it. What was once taken for granted suddenly feels precious. Small interactions gain enormous emotional significance, and ordinary moments can seem loaded with meaning because the mind is trying to recover a feeling of security. The person is no longer responding only to the present situation, but also to the deeper emotional needs that uncertainty has awakened. Understanding this dynamic reveals that genuine connection cannot be sustained through emotional control or constant reassurance. A relationship built upon predictability alone becomes fragile because it depends on one person maintaining the other's sense of certainty. Lasting emotional maturity develops when individuals learn to face uncertainty without allowing hidden fears to dictate their actions. Instead of trying to restore old patterns through pursuit, withdrawal, or emotional testing, they become capable of responding with awareness rather than instinct, creating space for a relationship that is based on mutual respect instead of unconscious fear. Every human being carries within them a hidden psychological territory made up of qualities, emotions, and impulses they have learned to deny, suppress, or ignore. These hidden aspects do not disappear simply because they are pushed out of conscious awareness. Instead, they continue to exist beneath the surface, quietly influencing thoughts, reactions, and relationships. The more a person insists that certain feelings could never belong to them, the more likely those feelings are to emerge indirectly, especially in close emotional connections. Love has a remarkable ability to illuminate these concealed parts, because intimacy reduces the distance between who we believe we are and who we truly are beneath our carefully maintained self-image. When a relationship becomes emotionally significant, hidden emotions often rise unexpectedly. A person who sees themselves as calm may suddenly experience intense jealousy. Someone who prides themselves on independence may discover a deep fear of being abandoned. Another who believes they are always generous may become unexpectedly possessive when attention shifts elsewhere. These reactions can feel confusing because they seem to contradict the identity the person has built over many years. Yet they reveal aspects of the personality that have existed all along, waiting for the right emotional conditions to surface. Jealousy, obsession, guilt, and possessiveness rarely appear without reason. They often emerge when a relationship threatens the stability of the ego. The ego prefers certainty and control because they preserve its familiar image of reality. When someone important becomes emotionally distant, unpredictable, or independent, the ego experiences this as a challenge. It begins searching for ways to restore balance, sometimes by creating suspicion, encouraging emotional withdrawal, or increasing the desire to hold more tightly to the relationship. These responses are not always conscious decisions, but automatic attempts to protect a vulnerable inner world. What makes these hidden emotions particularly powerful is that they are often projected outward. Instead of recognizing insecurity within themselves, a person may become convinced that the other is untrustworthy. Instead of admitting fear of rejection, they may accuse the other of losing interest. The unconscious transforms internal conflicts into external problems because facing hidden emotions directly can be deeply uncomfortable. This creates misunderstandings, repeated arguments, and emotional cycles that seem to have no clear beginning or end. Yet these uncomfortable reactions also carry the potential for profound self-understanding. Every moment of irrational jealousy, unexplained anger, or overwhelming attachment points towards something within that seeks recognition. Rather than treating these emotions as enemies to be eliminated, they can be approached as messengers revealing neglected parts of the personality. When a person becomes willing to examine these hidden impulses with honesty instead of denial, emotional reactions lose much of their unconscious power. The relationship then becomes more than a source of pleasure or pain. It becomes a mirror reflecting the deeper landscape of the human psyche, where genuine growth begins through awareness rather than avoidance. If this insight is changing the way you see your own relationships, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. More importantly, leave a comment with one word: awakened. That single word is a reminder that real power begins the moment you understand the patterns that once controlled you. One of the most confusing patterns in deep emotional relationships is the constant movement between closeness and distance. Just when two people seem to be growing closer, one begins to withdraw. When separation increases, the other suddenly feels a stronger desire to reconnect. This recurring rhythm is often called the push-pull pattern. But beneath its outward appearance lies a far more complex psychological process. It is not simply a game of attraction or rejection. It reflects the unconscious struggle between the desire for intimacy and the fear of losing one's emotional independence. Human beings naturally seek connection because belonging satisfies a profound psychological need. At the same time, every individual also protects a sense of personal identity and autonomy. When a relationship becomes emotionally intense, these two forces can begin to compete with one another. Closeness offers comfort, understanding, and security, yet it also carries the possibility of vulnerability, disappointment, and emotional dependence. As intimacy deepens, the unconscious may perceive this openness as a potential threat, prompting one person to create distance in an effort to regain a feeling of inner stability. Distance has a surprising effect on the mind. What is no longer immediately available often becomes more psychologically significant. Memories grow sharper, ordinary conversations seem more meaningful, and the imagination begins filling empty spaces with idealized images. The unconscious dislikes unfinished emotional experiences, so it continues replaying moments, searching for explanations, and constructing possible outcomes. This is why separation frequently intensifies attraction rather than diminishing it. The absence itself becomes emotionally charged because the mind is trying to resolve what feels incomplete. As one person withdraws, the other may feel an increasing urge to restore closeness. Once contact resumes and emotional certainty returns, however, the individual who previously sought connection may begin feeling overwhelmed, causing them to retreat instead. The roles can reverse repeatedly, creating an exhausting cycle in which both people alternate between pursuing and distancing themselves. Neither fully understands why the pattern continues, because much of it unfolds beneath conscious awareness rather than through deliberate choice. The push-pull dynamic becomes even stronger when unresolved emotional experiences from the past shape present relationships. Early experiences of inconsistency, emotional neglect, or unpredictable affection can teach the unconscious that love is never entirely secure. As a result, closeness may unconsciously trigger anxiety, while distance awakens longing. Each movement reinforces the other, making emotional intensity feel mistaken for emotional depth. The relationship begins revolving around uncertainty instead of genuine understanding. Breaking this pattern requires more than improved communication or temporary reassurance. It begins when both individuals recognize that their strongest emotional reactions often arise from inner conflicts rather than the other person's actions alone. By becoming aware of these unconscious forces, they gradually stop interpreting every withdrawal as rejection and every pursuit as proof of love. Emotional closeness then becomes a conscious choice, instead of an automatic response driven by hidden fears, allowing the relationship to grow through trust rather than through repeated cycles of loss and return. Words are often treated as the primary language of relationships, yet the unconscious communicates far more through actions than through spoken promises. A person may carefully choose what they say, but their behavior frequently reveals motives they have not fully recognized themselves. This is why the next move someone makes after a period of emotional tension can carry greater psychological meaning than anything they have previously expressed. The unconscious rarely announces its intentions directly. Instead, it reveals itself through patterns, timing, hesitation, and seemingly ordinary decisions that become symbolic expressions of deeper emotional conflicts. When emotions remain unresolved, the mind seeks ways to restore balance without necessarily understanding why. Someone who insists they have moved on may unexpectedly revisit old conversations, reach out after weeks of silence, or begin paying closer attention to your presence from a distance. These actions often surprise even the person performing them, because they are not always planned. The unconscious has quietly continued processing the emotional bond, and eventually that inner activity finds expression through behavior. What appears random on the surface frequently reflects an internal attempt to answer unresolved psychological questions. The timing of these actions is particularly significant. People often reappear when the emotional dynamic has shifted rather than when everything remained familiar. If you stop seeking their attention, become more emotionally independent, or redirect your focus toward your own life, the established pattern changes. The unconscious notices this disruption immediately. Predictability has disappeared, and with it, the sense of certainty that once existed. The next move is often an unconscious effort to understand what has changed, or to reconnect with a feeling that has become unexpectedly uncertain. These symbolic actions can take many forms. A brief message that carries no obvious purpose, unexpected curiosity about your life, increased engagement after long periods of silence, or subtle attempts to remain visible, all represent more than isolated behaviors. They may be expressions of an internal conflict between the desire to reconnect and the fear of appearing vulnerable. Instead of openly acknowledging these emotions, the unconscious often chooses indirect paths, revealing itself through small but meaningful gestures. However, symbolic actions should never be interpreted in isolation. The human mind has a natural tendency to search for patterns, and strong emotions can encourage us to assign profound meaning to every interaction. Genuine understanding comes from observing consistency rather than isolated moments. A single message, glance, or unexpected appearance may reflect curiosity, nostalgia, guilt, loneliness, or many other motivations. Only repeated behavior over time reveals whether these actions are part of a deeper transformation or simply temporary emotional impulses. Recognizing the symbolic nature of behavior encourages a more thoughtful perspective on relationships. Instead of becoming absorbed in every word or searching endlessly for hidden messages, attention shifts toward the broader patterns that unfold naturally. Actions repeated with honesty, consistency, and emotional responsibility reveal far more about the state of a person's inner world than dramatic declarations ever could, because the unconscious often speaks most clearly through what people repeatedly do, rather than what they confidently say. One of the greatest turning points in any deep relationship occurs when a person shifts from emotional dependency to inner stability. This transformation is often misunderstood because it does not require becoming cold, detached, or indifferent. Instead, it involves reclaiming the psychological center that was gradually handed over to another person. Emotional dependency develops when our sense of peace, confidence, or self-worth becomes closely tied to someone else's attention, approval, or presence. Without realizing it, we begin measuring our emotional state according to their responses rather than our own inner understanding. The relationship slowly becomes the foundation upon which our identity rests, making every interaction feel heavier than it truly is. The unconscious encourages this pattern because it naturally seeks security. When another person consistently provides comfort, affection, or validation, the mind begins treating them as a source of emotional certainty. Their messages brighten the day, their silence creates anxiety, and their approval becomes evidence of personal value. Over time, this dependence can become so subtle that it feels like love itself. Yet genuine love and emotional dependency are not the same. Love allows two individuals to grow together while preserving their individuality, whereas dependency gradually weakens the ability to remain emotionally grounded without constant reassurance. When a person begins reclaiming their psychological center, noticeable changes occur. They no longer chase every unanswered message or interpret every silence as rejection. Their attention returns to their own goals, values, and personal growth. Decisions become guided less by fear of losing someone and more by alignment with their own principles. This inner shift changes not only how they feel, but also how they relate to others. Conversations become more authentic because they are no longer driven by the hidden need for approval or emotional rescue. Interestingly, this newfound stability often alters the dynamics of the relationship itself. The other person may sense that something has changed, even if they cannot explain it. The familiar patterns of pursuit and reassurance no longer function in the same way. Emotional independence introduces an element of unpredictability because the relationship is no longer governed by unconscious dependence. This can lead the other person to become more attentive, curious, or reflective, not because they are being manipulated, but because the emotional balance has naturally shifted. Remaining centered also transforms how challenges are experienced. Experiences that were never fully understood or emotionally resolved tend to recreate themselves in new situations. A person who once feared rejection may become overly sensitive to small signs of distance. Someone who learned that love was unpredictable may unconsciously expect instability even in healthy relationships. These patterns continue because they operate automatically, outside conscious awareness. They influence attraction, emotional reactions, and decision-making without announcing their presence. As long as they remain unseen, they quietly guide behavior, convincing a person that the problem always exists outside themselves. Awareness interrupts this automatic cycle. The moment someone notices a familiar emotional reaction arising, they create a small but powerful space between feeling and action. Instead of immediately chasing reassurance, withdrawing in fear, or assuming the worst, they begin asking deeper questions. They become curious about why a particular situation feels so emotionally charged, and whether the intensity belongs entirely to the present moment or carries echoes of earlier experiences. This reflective process weakens the unconscious grip because hidden patterns lose much of their influence once they are clearly recognized.